Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Fiona Hanlon, and I'm part of the Compliance Institute exec team. So today's webinar is on accountability in action. It's empowering ownership in the context of Ireland's IEF and regulatory expectations. As always, the webinar will run for approximately 1 hour, and we do always encourage our attendees to ask questions. So please submit your questions into the Q&A function, and they'll be addressed at the end of the webinar. The CPD code is 2025-2167, and that will be sent to all attendees along with a copy of the slides once the session concludes. We'll also have the session recorded and uploaded to the library section of compliance.ie later on today. So our speaker today is Evelyn Johnson. Evelyn is the Managing Director of the Resiliency Hub, a centre for authentic, values-driven leadership and sustainable change. Evelyn has over 3 decades of senior leadership experience in the financial services sector and 18 years in executive coaching. Thank you so much, Evelyn, and over to you.
I sound ancient, don't I? Thank you, Fiona. And thank you to everybody that joins. I was saying to Fiona, I'm not used to this system, so I have 2 screens, and the one over here, which is over there, is where my slides are. So if I'm not looking at you, it's because I'm looking at the slides. So we've about an hour, but we'll allow about 15 minutes for questions. So if you think of any questions, just jot them down as you're going through. So everybody is very welcome, and thank you for joining. So I'll introduce myself first. I don't need to. My background is financial services, and yes, it's 3 decades. I was about nearly 32 years in financial services. And what I did know throughout my career, because I did a lot of compliance in my career in financial services, what I noticed throughout my career is any time that there was a compliance or a regulatory matter, my stress levels probably went up a little bit. Because there is an unknown, and there's a certain amount that we can do in relation to compliance. But now that there's regulation that's coming in, we need to actually probably enforce it a little bit better. And one of the things is around accountability. And when I look back over my career, the times that we were accountable or we were not accountable, or we were responsible or we were not responsible, are probably the times, right or wrong, where there was probably a little bit of a blame game. Not saying that there was a culture in my career ever around blame game, but actually, if I was completely authentic with myself, I was probably at times, I would try to find a finger to point if something did go wrong. I'm very privileged to get to do a lot of work with organizations and financial services organizations now around resilience, around accountability, coaching, team coaching, and accountability is one of the areas that I am really seeing come to the fore now, because we don't really understand it and what we mean by it. So we're going to demystify that a little bit today. First, we're going to do a check-in. I'll go through 4 slides here, and then Fiona's going to put a poll up. So it's every day when we show up, we're not always in our best. I mean, it's hard to always be in our best, at our best, showing up perfectly well all of the time. I mean, it's exhausting if we are, and a lot of people that I coach on a one-to-one basis will say that actually a lot of it isn't authentic. So these are a series of signal cards that I created, and anybody can use them, and I know that slides are shared afterwards. So it's how we communicate with others and how we communicate with ourselves. It's a little bit like the Wi-Fi signal. And the first one here is no signal. And quite often people show up disconnected with no signal. Pessimistic might sound like a little bit of a negative word, but it can be a bit. My sons used to call this meh and stressed. That's no signal. 1 bar is that kind of, oh, get me to Friday, oh, it's month end, struggling with motivation, difficulty communicating. If you can imagine 2 people that come together with 1 bar as their communication style or how they're showing up in any good day, it's actually very difficult to get a conversation across. there's a lot of avoidance or cameras off or not showing up for meetings or cancelling meetings when you're at a 1-bar. So just be aware of that in yourself and in others. 2 bars is kind of where a lot of people hang out. It's coasting, we're managing tasks, we can stay focused, and we're in a better mood. Tends to be the Thursday, Friday mode. 3 bars is positive, more focused, energized. That's where we're probably at our most optimum. And I'm going to talk about that later, because being at our optimum is actually really important when we're showing up as leaders and being accountable as leaders. And then where we all want to be is full signal. Full signals tends to be the day before you're going on holidays. It tends to be full signal. It's connective, creative, everything is possible. There's happy, we're in that flow mode, you're buzzing. That's that full signal mode. When I talk to people, everybody recognizes this, but they also recognize when they're not at full signal. So that's a summary slide of how am I feeling right now. So Fiona's going to launch a poll just to get a feel for how people are right now. You can let me know, Fiona, when I can see it's open.
Yeah, that will. I'll just take them out before it's come through. Okay, I'll launch the results there now.
Excellent.
No.
See.
Can you see the results, Evan?
No, I can't. Will you let me know what they are?
Yeah, so we have 0 on no signal,
Yeah.
23% on 1 bar,
Yeah.
38% on 2 bars,
Yeah.
and 36% on 3 bars, and only 4% on full signal.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a million. So that's interesting as a group of people, and it's nice because nobody knows what people voted on. But that's actually very nice just to see as a general flow from an audience like this. So if you were to add up, and I'm doing this very roughly mathematically, over 50% of the people in this room or on this call now are struggling a little bit, or they're just getting by. They're either 1 bar or 2 bars. That if that represents actually what's showing up in the workplace as well, we can actually take the assumption that in a lot of cases people are showing up that they're not at their full level of communication or wellness. And that's a really important thing when we're going through things like compliance and month end and that type of thing, is to be aware of how you are and how others are. And for those who are 36%, and then only 4% at full signal, it does show you the variation that's actually in the workplace. So this is a very useful tool to use to check in with yourself as well. And if there are any questions at the end, just ask the questions. So thank you for doing that poll, and thank you for supporting that. So the objective of the session today is actually just to look at the IAF and actually really talk about responsibility and accountability. So there's a lot of takeaways here. I probably will go quite fast, but we leave time for questions, and at the end and afterwards people can reach out to me. What we want to do is just look at the difference between responsibility and accountability. And whilst it's very straightforward for a lot of people and there's a lot of understanding around it, I just wanted to really demystify that and just actually be clear on it. And then we want to talk about the mindset from reactive compliance to proactive integrity. Integrity is my buzzword. Integrity is actually how we're showing up and speaking our truth. Integrity is really important in compliance and in a culture of compliance. And then we're going to just look at some practical tools to support accountability in teams, because it's very hard to be the isolated person who's accountable. So let's look at that. The first thing I'm going to do is it's slightly humorous story, but I use this a lot. It's the story of anybody, somebody, everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. And you can close your eyes or you can actually listen to it. There was an important job to be done and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. So it's a slightly humorous take on accountability. But actually look at it when we do the deep dive on it. The task was there was an important job to be done. There was everybody's assumptions because everybody thought that somebody would do it. Nobody's action. Anybody could have done the job, but nobody did it. Somebody's anger. Somebody got angry because they felt that it was everybody's job. And the blame game, then everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. And everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. That was the outcome. Now, when I play that in team coaching scenarios, or when I'm giving presentations or I'm delivering a training, we use this because actually it's a kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of actually showing, oh yeah, this kind of happens. And I remember a lot, even throughout my own career, the use of the word they did that. I said, well, we need to actually identify what they is. Who is it? Is it a team? What's the responsibility? So just remember that the next time that there's a, could somebody do that? And we're going to talk about that. Behind that, and I'll bring this up a few times, is what I call the choice map. The choice map actually has two very strong words in it. It's got well-being and it's got victim. When we go into that blame, helpless, it's not my fault, I didn't do it, I didn't have enough time, I was too busy, all of those things are what I call that victim mentality. Now, it's not a negative, it's an awareness. So just to be aware that you're in this kind of blame, I don't feel strong enough, I don't think I can speak up, there's an element of hopelessness in victim. Be aware of that when you're actually delivering feedback or in a mode or about to create a project, start a project, work in a team. The best teams work at the top. Best teams work when they're in this well-being. Now you can find your own words for this. Well-being can be accountability, victim can be blame. You can find your own words. These are just words that I use interchangeably around choice. I'm going to come back to this, but just to be aware that there is literally a second in the difference between being a victim in a particular incident and being in your well-being or empowered, whichever way you want to use it. Now, why do I say there's literally a split second? You could be hanging out feeling that the world is the sky is falling down, but actually, if I was to ring you 5 minutes later and tell you that I'd won 25 million in the lotto and I was giving you half of it, you'd very quickly be up to well-being. So we are very quick to be able to shift, but the first thing is awareness. So we'll come back to that. So what's the background? I'm not going to go into too much detail in the regulation. I want to give supporting tips to just aids to actually how we can actually implement this for ourselves and the organization. So there's the individual accountability framework signed into law on the 9th of March, full commencement 29th of December 23, and then SEER comes into scope on the 1st of July 24. This I thought was a really good summary from the central bank. The purpose of the senior executive accountability regime is to improve governance, performance and accountability in firms by placing obligations on firms and senior individuals within them to set out clearly where responsibility and decision making lies for their business. So you can see that the words are all intertwined. So it's IAF, heightened regulatory scrutiny, cultural expectations. So the word culture keeps featuring as well, and trust and reputation at stake. So we're going to look at these. So preparing for this, I just said I'm going to actually summarize. Well, what is this shifting mindset and the cultural emphasis? So the IAF was introduced to improve governance and foster healthier cultures in financial services. It's encouraging personal responsibility rather than hiding behind organisation and ambiguity. It's developed in response to systemic issues. It's to restore trust through transparency and accountable leadership. And it requires the statements of responsibility and management responsibility maps. But whilst these can be mapped out, and there's a huge amount of work that's gone on in the background in most organizations to actually tick this box, even though it's a rather large implication and box, it's actually what is behind that. What's my personal responsibility and accountability behind that? And then reduces cultural risks of collective evasion. So that's where we're aiming for. So let's look at responsibility versus accountability. And if there's anything that's coming up in your head now, just jot it down and we'll do questions later. So simply put, responsibility is tasks, roles, and duties, and accountability is ownership, answerability, followed through. It's really subtle, but there's a powerful distinction between the two. So I can be responsible for tasks and roles and duties. Accountability is the ownership. So I'm going to just do a little bit more of a deep dive. You'll be getting the slides anyway. Authority and ownership. So then delegation of responsibility. Responsibility can be assigned to others, enabling task completion through delegation. But actually the accountability is always retained with the individual, the ultimate accountability. And that's a really important distinction between the two. And many of you know this. So I'll go through these quick enough. Then there are consequences of each. So failing responsibility, incomplete tasks often result in failure in responsibility, impacting productivity and outcomes. If I had €1 for every time somebody tells me that they're too busy and that's why they didn't get something done, I'd be very, very, very rich woman, because actually that's failing in our responsibility. And then failing accountability can lead to disciplinary actions and a loss of trust within organizations. So there is a big distinction between the two. But we're going to talk about time, because time actually is often used as an excuse for actually being too busy and not having enough time. I am not saying for 1 second that people aren't completely busy, particularly at month end or if something happens. It can be overwhelmingly busy. And in fact, if you get this an additional task on top of another, that actually can cause an awful lot of stress. And actually there's a fight or flight mode around that, is how do I respond? And some people freeze. And I see it quite often in one-to-one coaching when we start exploring, okay, so people say, well, I was procrastinating, but actually that's often in relation to a response. But if we ultimately know what our responsibility and our accountability is, it becomes easier. If we become more open and transparent in organizations and in our teams talking about this, it becomes easier to say, I'm struggling with this. It becomes easier to hear the dynamic conversations that can happen in teams. Because quite often we're hiding and we're hiding, just saying, oh, I didn't get to it. And you can see then how that can actually impact our well-being and our communication style, as we saw it there with the signal cards, that nearly 50% of the people are at 1 bar or 2 bars. So just be aware of how this all weaves together and how accountability actually has a huge amount of emphasis and burden, actually, is the word behind it. So delegation and trust, we're going to talk about trust later, but I just wanted to put these slides in so that people can see that there is kind of a responsibility assignment, you can maintain it, and then there's building trust. But I'm not going to go into too much detail on that just because I want to move on from a time point of view. So how do you build a culture of accountability? And I'm going to give you tips and tools for that today. First, you encourage ownership. So organizations foster accountability by encouraging employees to take responsibility for their actions and results. That's harder to do than these 2 sentences here, because there's a constant building and reminding in people. If you've got a culture that actually doesn't encourage accountability and foster accountability, it takes a lot to keep that moving and to drive it. And the first thing in changing any culture or introducing a culture of accountability is awareness. People need to become aware of their role and where they are. And I will give you a couple of tools on that. We're going to promote transparency. It's really, really important. Even using the simple thing like those signal cards, transparency and communication, it builds trust. And there is one thing that we all know, particularly in financial services, is change is continuous. A culture of accountability allows us to drive continuous improvement. So there are some benefits to it. This was a game changer. I came across, there's a coach called Steve Chandler, and I did a bit of work with him probably about 3 years ago. He talks about expectations versus agreements. So you'll have this slide. Accountability thrives in clarity, not in assumptions. So this is what we mean. We're so used to expectations. Expectations, I'm expecting somebody to complete a document by Friday because that's what I put in the email. That was my expectation. My expectation was that their role is that they do X, Y, and Z compliance report at a certain time. My expectation is that that person has enough time because that's their role. All of those things are assumed. You can see there on the left-hand column, expectations are implied, assumed, unspoken. Sometimes they're quick emails and that's off my desk. They're one-sided. I'm expecting somebody to do something. This is just as relevant in your personal life as it is in your work life. Expectations without agreements lead to blame or disappointment. So you can see how you could go down to the bottom of that choice curve that I was showing you earlier. Expectations also have, it's a little current of power over mindset, but there's very little ownership in expectations because it's quite fluid. We haven't been really clear. However, on the right-hand column, we've got agreements. They're very explicit, they're discussed, and they're mutually decided. Can you do that report by 12 o'clock on Friday? Yes. What else do you need? I need actually for you to ask John to deliver the numbers behind that, and I need the dashboard to be updated for X, Y, and Z. I actually don't really understand what's happening in that breach, and I need somebody to actually explain that. I need to reach out to another department. They're all the things that you can have in that two-way conversation. Agreements build clarity, trust, and accountability. Partnership, and it's more empowered because it's shared ownership and follow through. You can see how this can happen and show up in nearly everyday work life. We have expectations, rightly or wrongly. There's nothing wrong with having expectations. The issue is when we don't actually formulate clear agreements, it's really hard to go back and to be accountable and to follow through. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'm going to tie that into responsibility and accountability. So expectations live at the level of responsibility. They describe the duties, but they lack clarity at times. And people may know that they're responsible, but they're not exactly sure what good looks like. So there's kind of a little bit of ambiguity. I know as a manager and a leader, when I was in my career, there were things that I asked people to do that were not clear. And then I would have this expectation and I'd wonder why they hadn't completed something. Equally, I worked for line managers who actually weren't clear in my direction, and I didn't actually ask the questions or make it clear. I didn't actually go back and ask and agree and become very clear. So agreements are the bridge to accountability. That's your takeaway. It's one of your key takeaways today. Agreements are the bridge to accountability. When expectations are translated into clear mutual agreements, they enable genuine accountability. You can't hold somebody to account fairly unless there's a share agreement about what has to be delivered or was to be delivered. This is equally relevant at home, emptying the dishwasher, putting out the bins, doing the shopping, having the uniforms ready, all of that. So many people returning to school this week, and there were a lot of expectations in people's houses as to who's going to do what. Nobody ever agreed it. A lot of cases. What's the cultural impact of this? So the cultural impact is there's a drift into this blame and frustration. And then it's like, well, they didn't do it. Now I have to micromanage them. But actually, there's no need for micromanaging. If you've experienced that at any stage in the workplace, there's very little need for micromanaging if you've got very clear agreements. But we miss that layer. It just happens. And sometimes it's because we actually don't have enough time to spend with somebody, but we miss that layer. Organizations with a culture of agreements foster trust, psychological safety, and true accountability, because people know exactly what they own and can be empowered to deliver. And I tried to summarize these slides. So responsibility is the role and the task. The expectation, often unspoken, can breed confusion. Agreement is clear, shared commitment. Accountability is ownership of the outcome. So actually, even putting the bins out, if you put that into those 4 lines, and you see how actually that there'd be less confusion and probably gripes around putting bins out on whatever day it is in your household. So that's the cultural impact. And then this is the cost of non-accountability: blame, compliance, tick box mentality, slow decision making, because sometimes we actually don't have enough information. And we're going to do that. We're going to look at that. The real consequence of weak accountability is scandals. It's also reputation. Accountability now isn't just internal. It's visible to the regulators, to clients, and to the public. So it has become more and more heightened around the awareness of it. So most of you may have seen the accountability ladder. If you haven't, I'm just going to use it here as a way of actually an aid for seeing even some of the language that's happening in organizations and in your team. So applying the ladder in the IAF era is what I call this. The accountability ladder, which I'm going to show you in the next slide, it aligns with the IAF code conduct standards, and it encourages proactive integrity, because we can talk in a similar language. We can actually see where we land on the accountability ladder. It supports leaders in setting the tone. This is what the ladder looks like. There are loads of versions. If you Google it, there are lots of different versions. Above the line is, I can see it, I own it, I seek solutions, I make it happen. Below the line is, I wait and hope, I make excuses, I blame and complain, and I'm unaware or unconscious of what's, I'm unaware of actually what is happening. This language below the line, you hear it quite regularly in organizations. And rightly or wrongly, a lot of people do wait and hope that there's something is going to happen. And regularly when I'm doing one-to-one coaching, I hear the word procrastination. I was procrastinating, but quite often procrastination really is just something else in disguise. That wait and hope, hoping that something will become clearer, because actually the expectations and the agreements were not clarified at the beginning. When you do very clear agreements at the beginning, you can own things, you can see it, it becomes really clear. You seek solutions and you can make it happen. It just becomes really clear. Now you can see where the choice map aligns really nicely with the accountability ladder. If you put the two side by side, the top of the accountability ladder is similar to this well-being, which is similar to 3 bars and 4 bars. The bottom of the ladder is that waiting and hoping and making excuses. And a lot of the language is that blame and victim mentality. So just listen to language at times. And rather than pointing it out as being a flaw or something wrong, have conversations around it, because these are 2 tools that you can use. If you're using these in meetings and starting to use some of these tips, so assumptions versus agreements, the accountability ladder, the choice curve, some of the companies that I work with, we've created little cards, or we just have a printout of the ladder. And actually what you do is you can get people to actually see where they are at any given moment. But these are just questions you can ask. Where are we on the ladder right now? What's within our control? What else do we need to know? What are the assumptions? Do we have agreements? There's lots of simple language that we can actually start using. We just need to get comfortable with it. So embedding this accountability culture in meetings and feedback and reporting just manages it. We lose this kind of victim side of things, the blaming language, and we move above the line and not below the line. I'm very conscious there's a typo there that I can actually, it's the word conscious. I need to change that before we finalize the slide. So a mindset shift from reactive compliance to proactive integrity. Okay, so let's look at that, what that actually means. Mindset shift. Now, the first thing that we do in any mindset shift is we have to become aware of what actually our existing mindset is. It's really hard to shift our mindset if we don't really know and have an awareness around how we are actually feeling in any given moment. So that's why those signal cards are quite useful, or that choice curve is quite useful to see when you come out of a meeting and you feel very, you're just not settled and you're at kind of a low signal card. You can actually go back and use these tools and go, okay, well, have I gone into this victim mentality? So for example, a really simple one, right, is I downloaded this ladder from a website. I did not see the typo, but in my head, I went, well, I downloaded from a website. I didn't do the typo. That's a real blame culture even in me. And I'm being very honest as I say that. Now I'll fix it. But actually, it was, I had to catch myself and go, oh, there I was in the blame. No, I should have caught every typo. And that's so simple and so tiny, but it's so ingrained in us that we want to do right and to feel right, that actually a lot of us actually, especially when we're in really responsible jobs, a lot of us actually feel vulnerable if we make a mistake. It's really a challenge to us to make mistakes. And I've worked with a lot of people, very senior people in one-to-one coaching, where making a mistake has a huge impact on their well-being. So just be really mindful of that as we go through the slides. Again, if you have questions, just jot them down and we'll answer them. So what gets in the way? This is what I call the obstacle grid. It's always one of these things. I've yet to find something else to add to it. It fits nicely into 9 as well. If you go and the first question that you ask yourself, well, what's holding me back? What's getting in the way? What obstacle do I have? Or work with somebody that you're in a team. So what's getting in the way? A lot of people will go time. Time, if you can just block that out as your first, because that seems to be a default. I didn't have enough time. I'm too busy. I was just coaching somebody this morning and the team actually constantly say I'm too busy, and now she has actually made them more accountable, and she's saying, okay, well, I'll take it from you. And as soon as that happens, there's something that switches in the brain that goes, oh no, I can do it. And then it'll switch into one of these things, because we don't want to be seen as not being able to do things. So it usually then falls into something else. So we're going to talk about some of those things. So one of the main things that I see when working with organizations is the other people being what gets in the way or the obstacle. Some of you may have come across DISC. It's a psychometric test. It's a work style. I am going to give you the 2-minute introduction to DISC, but what I really want you to see in this is try and identify where you lie on the 4 quadrants in the screen. So look at the screen as I'm going through this, and then actually you will see your work style. Now, this has been done very quickly. You can do a deeper dive. It is a work style. It is not who you are, but it's really important to understand from a communications point of view how accountability and agreements and expectations can get so confusing when we don't understand somebody's communication style. So introduction to DISC. So just I ask you the question, are you a fast-paced and outspoken person, or are you cautious and reflective? You can immediately see that I'm fast-paced and outspoken. But just ask, are you at the top or are you at the bottom? Then you ask yourself, are you questioning and skeptical, or are you accepting and warm? So this is where I hang out. Not everybody finds me accepting and warm, just to caveat with that. And then you kind of see, well, where would you sit? If you are fast-paced and questioning and skeptical, you'd be up here. If you are fast-paced and outspoken, accepting and warm, you'd be kind of here. If you're questioning and skeptical and cautious and reflective, you'd be hanging around here. Accepting and warm and cautious and reflective, you'd be here. Okay, so to get a feel for where you are and put yourself there, that maps to a work style. And these are the work style, and that's DISC. Okay, this is the easier one. So just take a minute just to look at that and see, okay, well, if you were in the top right hand corner, but you know, doing the simplest form of this exercise, be up here as an I. A lot of people in compliance are C, and you'll find a high level of this C. It is a really good thing to have C, because it's that conscientiousness that's really important in a compliance function. However, in a team, it's good to have a balance of all four, or to have people who have this high C. They're very conscientious people, but actually they also want to work in a team environment. If you are in a team, and you very quickly start to see this, if you are in a team with everybody is at this high C, you probably need somebody to step into this kind of the D role, kind of to make the decision, to be more dominant, so that things can happen, and that you can start even in a meeting having that kind of agreements versus assumptions versus agreements type conversation. We need people to actually step forward to have those conversations. What happens, however, if you go back to that grid, which it'll show in the slide again, is we tend, if things start to go wrong when it comes to other people. So if you can imagine, I'm a D and I'm a high D. If you imagine that, and I'm very direct in my behavior and actually how I ask somebody to do things. Somebody who actually is a team player and who actually fears loss of stability will find that quite, there's kind of a friction that happens between two people. So I might simply just ask for a report. I have my assumptions hat on and I haven't done any agreements. What that can do for a person who actually wants to make sure everything is right before we move forward, so he's somebody who could be both of these, it actually can put them into this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So fight is somebody who actually goes, well, you never told me this and I couldn't do that, ties really nicely into the blame below the line on the accountability ladder. Now, some of what I'm describing here is actually quite extreme, but there are little nuances that show up actually in how we show up in the workplace. So that's fight. Flight is, oh, I'll just do something else. I'll avoid that. I'll get to that at the end. Oh, I don't have enough time. So that avoidance thing. And we're not even 100% sure that it's avoidance, but all we know is that we actually are kind of nearly frozen is the next extreme of it. I'll just leave, I'll do it tomorrow, I will do it the next day. That type of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Even research this a little bit more, because we just don't have enough time today to do it, but even research this just a little bit more, just to see, okay, well, what do I really mean in this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn? Fawn is that kind of nearly cowering and not being able to move forward. And you will see that with somebody when it's their reaction, they're overwhelmed. We can flip through these. So one of the tendencies that I would see in a lot of people, particularly senior people, is that they actually do retreat a little bit and they kind of hide until they're really clear what's going on. And that's a natural, instinctive reaction. That's all it is. Because really what we want to be as human beings is we want to be accepted in life. Unfortunately, however, if we're constantly not being playing our own role, we're constantly not speaking up, we're constantly in that victim mode, we're constantly below the line and not being able to react and be accountable. Ultimately, what happens in the end is we end up probably in this strain. And when we get into this strain, that is when it actually impacts our ability to work. So if you found yourself saying that you were 1 bar or 2 bars, just watch this. Just watch and see how much are you in this strain. Because if you're in this strain, it is a result of all of those other things that are happening. A lot of them that are out of your control completely, especially if we go down to the simple slide of assumptions versus agreements, or actually that there is an obstacle that's getting in your way. And quite often it can just be the way that you interact with somebody and how somebody might be actually freezing and actually not being available because they're going through their own version of strain, but they're reacting in a different way. If you're finding yourself here, go back and have conversations or use some of these tools. If anybody is finding themselves here on a regular basis or even here at the crisis, because compliance is high, there is a lot of integrity, there's a lot of emphasis on accountability, there's a lot of emphasis on getting things done at the right time, on time. Huge burden and responsibility. There's also great freedom in actually having a job like compliance that you actually enjoy doing, because it's in my career, I would say the compliance functions and the regulatory functions that I did over the years were probably my favorite roles. Actually, there's a really good satisfaction of a job well done. So I know I'm going fast, but there's loads there, and I will definitely answer any questions even post this. So trust is huge. We think that trust is, I trust you. Do you trust me? Trust, there's so much underneath trust that I created a trust grid. So look at a trust here. So trust allows you to be above the ladder. Trust is kind of, it's underlying here. If I don't trust what's happening, or I don't trust somebody, or I don't trust my colleague, or I don't trust myself, I might wait and hope, and I might make excuses, and I might blame and complain. I'm just unaware. A lot of the time, we're not aware of actually whether we're trusting or not. So this is another little takeaway tool for you. Look at yourself in relation to trust. So rank yourself. In the middle it's 0, out here is 10. Rank yourself from a 0 to 10 in each of these areas. So actually, I might consider myself to be hugely reliable. I might consider myself to be very transparent and empathetic, actually. Am I credible? I'd like to think I am credible. The one that I have been working on, now I'm not saying I'm 10 in all of these, and I'm very honest, is my integrity. Because whilst I might feel that I have high integrity, quite often I catch myself saying something and then I'll go, really? That's when I know that there's another layer behind that. Usually it's that I am protecting myself, but it may be that I don't trust the other person that I'm speaking to. And whether we like it or not, the other person is usually a mirror of what's going on in our lives. I don't know if you've heard that before, but quite often that happens. So do this little exercise with yourself, but also do it with people that you're working with, where you might feel that it's like we're poles apart. I can't get through to them. Why can't they trust me? Why don't they understand me? Actually do this exercise and see, okay, what area are they falling down in? And that sounds very negative, but you know that they rate lower. So I work with somebody actually, and I actually know 100% all of the time that they will not show up in time, that I'll be waiting for something. And it actually used to really bug me until I realized that I was a little bit of an last minute Lenny. in a lot of things that I do. In fact, I had these slides prepared last Friday, and then I adjusted them yesterday, and then I adjusted them this morning, and I gave them to Fiona probably at about 10 o'clock. That's, for some people, that's a little bit too last minute. I knew I was reliable enough that I would do them. But actually, for Fiona, if Fiona was the type of person that really needed them by last Friday, she would consider me unreliable and may not trust me again. I don't know what you were thinking, Fiona, but anyway, that's an example of it. Belief, motivation, and fear ties nicely into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Just know that if there's a fear behind you not showing up or doing something, go back to the obstacle grid and figure out, is it a fear of the work style of that person? I have seen it so often when I do DISC work with organizations and with individuals, and they realize that the person just had a direct style and they were reacting to the direct nature of the person that they were working with. Really hard to actually then create this accountability framework. You're so caught up at the bottom of the accountability ladder because you can't get above the line and take ownership of it. Because what happens is we go into the fight, freeze, or fawn. It's so rapid. The decline is so rapid, but the good thing is moving up the ladder is so quick as well. The first thing is to actually catch ourselves. So with that, I've summarized the culture of empowered ownership, from fear to trust, from box ticking to integrity, and you've the tools in this, from directives, empowered decision making. And time, I am conscious of time now, so I'm going to finish with this, is time for accountability. You can see that that's in the grid here. Try not to use time as being an obstacle for accountability. This is a little guide that I use with people. When we're highly productive in that 4-bar, we're in our flow. We don't have any survival or reaction response. What do I need by survival or reaction response? Freeze. I freeze sometimes if somebody asks me something that I don't understand. That is my survival response. If my survival response ends up being emphasized, freezing, constantly holding back, or the other survival response that I see really regularly is that people they become the helper. I want anybody to like me. I want to please everybody, and you get so caught up in putting your hands. Oh, I'll do that. I'll do that. Oh, I'll finish that. That we actually become so stuck in that, what we call our survival response, becoming that helper and the supporter, is that we're actually not in our flow anymore because it is impacted. It's impacted, and then we have less and less time because our mind gets caught up with all we have to do. So what we need to do is stay as much as we can being productive and not in that stress response. I need to do it right. I need to get it right. Fear behind it. This is what fear does. It stops you being in your flow. And finally, I'm going to talk about just the tips for building accountability in teams. Shift the expectations to agreements. Use the accountability ladder and bring it in. I'll change so there's no typo on it. Spot below the line language. Encourage above the line. There are organizations that I'm working with now that actually bring the ladder into most meetings. Clarity before commitment. What does good look like? Make accountability visible. Have trackers. And I openly have check-ins. And if you see that somebody is actually falling behind, have the conversation. Build trust through transparency. It's a culture of learning, not fear. And leaders model it first. So the accountability spreads from the top down. And I'm going to just leave that out. There's just a little tip there on just wellness and actually breathing exercise, but they'll be in the slides, and then if anybody has any questions afterwards. But sometimes we just need to pause and reflect. So the key takeaways today: reflect where I am on the ladder. Where am I on the choice curve? one step I can take this week to model accountancy for myself and my team. And accountability is an everyday practice, not a project. Have a little think where you are right now. And I have left 10 minutes, Fiona, for Q&A. And that's my contact details. And please reach out. I'm always happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Evan. That was really, really excellent, I have to
Very
say.
fast.
No, it's really good. Thank you so much. So yeah, look, we have a few questions in there now, so I'll kick off with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this first question refers back to the accountability ladder. So the attendee wants, what do you do if your manager is below the line all the time, and no matter what you say, they do not see themselves to have any fault in whatever happens, always blaming everyone, sees themselves as absolutely perfect?
Yeah. And so my first, it's a brilliant question, because I think probably everybody who's on this webinar is going, oh yeah, I know that. All you can do is keep, in fact, I would actually bring in the accountability ladder if I was brave enough. I would actually say, I attended this, I saw this, I think this is very useful for the team. So not just isolating that person. There are humans on this planet, and I know a lot of them, who are never wrong. And it is very, very difficult to shift that mindset. What I would do though, however, is start tracking the language. So if somebody is saying, that's not my fault, or I'm just going to wait and see, no, I didn't have anything to do with that, just repeat back the language. I didn't have anything to do with that. You didn't have anything to do with that. Just keep saying the language back. But ultimately, if I was brave, I would bring in the accountability ladder. I would have an authentic conversation. I would say, I'm finding this a little bit challenging. So go back then and use the assumptions versus the agreements. And you can do that quite covertly first. You can actually say, so I know you're expecting me to have that report at 12 o'clock. I found the last time that we did that, I didn't have enough information. Do you have 10 minutes? I put a 15-minute call into the diary. Let's discuss it. If that isn't a good enough answer in the time we have here, just reach out to me and I can have a 10 or 15-minute conversation. It's a really, really important one to get your head around, because what happens is if you're constantly in that, you can see you're then down at the 1 bar. You can see actually that in the choice curve, you're down at the victim mode, and you can see that slowly you're falling down the ladder. So the first thing is take your own ownership, and actually I'd use the assumptions versus agreements.
Thank you, Evan. And as you are aware, a lot of our attendees and members are kind of navigating the IAF at the moment. So we have a few questions in here related to that. So how do you see the introduction of SEER changing day-to-day decision making at senior levels?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I actually think that that's a cultural shift that needs to happen. And if you are observing, if you're senior enough to observe this, or you can influence in any way, it's to go back to the simplicity of bringing in a culture that doesn't have blame. And for me, the reason I brought the accountability ladder into this is it's so visually simple to see, okay, we need, in order to have a culture that aligns with SEER and the accountability framework, we need to be above the line on the accountability ladder. And I'm working with organizations at the moment now who have that all over the walls. Everybody knows that they need to be above the line. And it is the simplest one that's aligned to SEER.
Thank you. So sticking with that, how can firms balance regulatory expectations with maintaining a nimble and agile culture?
Oh yeah. Just say the first part of that question again. How? How
can firms balance regulatory expectations with maintaining an agile culture?
Yeah. I think if I was actually to go into an organization, they ask me this question, I think I would actually, in a moment of time, I would figure out where the organization was first, actually just to get a sense check. And then I would start shifting the culture and actually adapting to the regulation. Quite often, we haven't hit pause to see, okay, where are we at the moment? And actually, if you think about it in a firm, there may be, silos in organizations. One silo might think we're fantastic and we're meeting all regulatory expectations, and another area mightn't be. And I feel that has to be the first step, really, is to see, okay, get a sense check. Let's see where we're at here.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose sticking to the culture side of things, what practical steps can firms take to move from a box ticking compliance culture to one of a proactive integrity?
Yeah, it has to become part of the language. It actually has to become part of the language, and that won't happen overnight. And the reason that I included all of these tools is there is enough there. If you have enough of an influence in an organization, you start with you. I mean, quite often we're expecting everybody else to do something, but start with you and go, okay, well, hand on heart, how's the integrity for myself? Like that's what I had to look at last year and explore my own integrity last year. And I was a little bit like upset with myself because I actually had to kind of go hand on heart and go, okay, well, where am I? So start with yourself, then bring it into the teams. So it's like the ripple effect. But actually, ultimately, you really want to know, it's like the sat nav, actually. This is what's just come into my head. It's like if you set off to be ultimately aligned culturally, the integrity and trust and accountability as an organization, all aligned with SEER and regulatory requirements, right? If that's my ultimate goal, so that's the destination I'm trying to get to, and I throw that into my sat nav, I really need to be clear. Well, what's the vehicle that I'm driving? Who's with me? What direction am I going? How long is it going to take? And I think that they're the starting points. It's like ultimately we know where we have to get to, but I think we need to know who's in the car and how we're going to navigate it, because there's a lot in it.
Very good analogy, Evan. Thank you very much. So I want to finish off with this last one because, as you know, AI is everywhere at the minute and part of everything. So do you see accountability evolving as technology and AI increasingly influence decision making in financial services?
Yes, I do. However, I think we have to be super cautious. And I think a lot of organizations that I'm working with a lot of people have their own internal AI. We have to know that we trust whatever AI is coming in. Use your AI as a sounding board, but ultimately, there is going to be a lot more straight through processing. There is going to be a lot more computer generated compliance reporting. There's so much of it now. I mean, my first job, we had a Rolly fax. This is showing my age. We had a Rolly fax that came out with the NAVs, and we used to actually calculate them on a calculator. And there were 2 computers between the whole 8 of us in the first company that I worked in. And we really there was no chaos or confusion or computers. Now we've got systems that break down, and we've got a human layer, and now we've AI. So yes, I feel that most organizations are going to actually have to have responsibility statements and accountability around AI as well. And there's a nervousness.
Yeah.
But actually, if we look at the continuous change, I think we need to actually own it as well, don't we?
Absolutely.
It's not going away. It's certainly not going away as is.
Yeah. That's great. So I'll close out, obviously, Evan, thank you so much for today. and thank all of our attendees for joining. I'm sure these tools will help a lot of our members and attendees navigate through the IAF framework. So as I said, these slides will be sent on to everybody, so they'll be sent on shortly. And if you want to recap on anything, the recording will also be available in the library section of compliance.ie. So Evan, thank you once again, and thank you everybody for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, and feel free to reach out. My contact details are there. So thank you very much, and thank you, Fiona.
Thanks everyone, take care.
Bye.